Hi, today is September 28th, and I'm Tammy Sloop, Regional Editor for Shaw Media, and we're here with Esther Joy King, who is running as the Republican candidate for U.S. Rep in Illinois' 17th Congressional District. We're also joined by Sauk Valley Media Editor Erlene Hinton. Thanks for being with us today, Esther. We can start out by, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, Tammy, Erlene, great to be with you this morning. Uh, who is Esther Joy King? I am the daughter of Christian missionary parents. I was raised in Juarez, Mexico / El Paso, Texas, right on the border between the two countries, which you can imagine is a very different way of seeing the world and growing up. I learned from my mom and dad that service and being part of something bigger than myself uh, is where meaning comes from in life. And that theme has carried through my whole career. Just after undergrad, I moved to Afghanistan and I worked doing women's rights work in Afghanistan. And that experience truly made me very grateful to be an American and for this country that we have. And I came back to the United States, became a lawyer, and then ended up joining the United States Army Reserve as a JAG officer, a lawyer in the Army. And so I came here to the western part of Illinois through the Rock Island Arsenal. I'm doing annual training there, and I've loved the community. I've stayed. And now the next step, the next level of service to my country is running for Congress. So living here in Western Illinois, speaking with business leaders and people here in the area, I quickly learned that we do not have good representation right now. Sherry Bustos, our current representative, is doing a better job representing New York and California. She votes 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi, and she votes 94% of the time with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the progressive left representative from New York. So here in Western Illinois, those aren't our values. That's not what we believe in. And so people here, when I started talking with others, particularly some business leaders here in the Quad Cities area where I live, they said, Esther, with your background, we've been searching for anybody to run against Sherry Bustos because she's not representing us or working for us. And we would love to see you jump in. If you jump in, you got to go all in, 197%. And I had to ask myself in that moment, if not me, then who? And the sense of duty has really come up. And I've gotten to be I've loved being part of this experience with people because, like I mentioned, I have found people are so hungry for better government, better representation than we have right now. And so it's become much bigger than me, and it's about a movement. It's about people who want better for themselves and their communities. And this campaign has come to represent just our effort as regular people to step up and create better representation for ourselves.
And you say in talking with residents out in Western Illinois, they're looking for better representation, someone who represents their values and wants and needs. What are some of those values and wants and needs?
Yeah. So Tammy, one thing I hear about on a regular basis is constituency services. So just regular people that need help, whether it's through like a veteran who has benefits through Veterans Affairs or a senior citizen. So one story that comes top of mind, there's a senior citizen in Cambridge, and he had reached out to Sherry Bustos's office, and they said, oh no, we're not going to, I'm sorry, his Social Security benefits had been caught up and cut off somehow, and he was trying to get them reinstated and didn't know the right person to reach out to, didn't have any contacts at the Social Security Administration. So he reached out to his representative, and they hung up on him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. They said, you're not in our district. We're not going to help you. So he ended up reaching out to Representative Darren LaHood, who's south of us, and Darren's office helped this gentleman get his Social Security benefits back. So just baseline, one thing I hear about all the time is People want better service from their representative, access to the benefits that we already have as citizens, and the representatives just baseline low-hanging fruit is to help constituents get access to the benefits that the government offers. And so that's one thing I hear about all the time. Another top priority of families is lower health care costs. I spoke with a mother and father recently. They have 2 children, and the father expressed to me, he said, Esther, our family of 4, we are paying over $27,000 a year just to have an insurance plan, and it's unaffordable. We're sinking because health insurance is so expensive. And Tammy, to me, what that means is we need to work across party lines. We need to operate in a bipartisan way in Washington, D.C. to solve the healthcare cost crisis that we have in our country to help people.
Okay. How would you rate, kind of switching gears here, how would you rate the federal government's response to COVID?
Yeah. Well, I think initially there was some great work. We did get the CARES package that helps provide some stimulus support for small businesses, for workers, for remembering back, we did receive direct payments. I think the Paycheck Protection Program was an excellent program. So now, fast forwarding to what's happening in DC today, we are seeing how partisanship, and Nancy Pelosi in particular, is holding up further support for our communities because she has what I believe is a far left liberal agenda that she's trying to get jammed through Congress. And so she's holding captive the stimulus package. I believe we need to target support for our economy, for workers, specifically in response to the crisis. And we don't need to have a long wish list of let's try to jam everything through in this one crisis, but let's make sure and be responsive to the economic needs of our communities as they are and as they have been increased because of the pandemic. And so we need to have a responsive stimulus package that it gets through Congress right now.
Okay. I think Erlene's got a question for you.
What are your thoughts on the protests and social unrest that's happening across the nation? I mean, you have a little bit of a background with the reserves. How do you feel about people's ability to openly gather and, some people call it protests and others call it demonstrations. How do you feel about that whole issue?
Yeah. Erlene, I think first of all, there's a couple issues conflated together in this conversation. So first of all, talking about our First Amendment right to free speech and to demonstrate, I think what is happening in our country is an example and a worthy conversation and important cause to make sure everyone has equal access to the justice system and to make sure that Black Americans have true equality and justice. And that is a completely valid and important cause to support and to represent in our country. And so protecting and ensuring that people have a voice and a First Amendment right to speak and to express the need for reform. We've seen it play out in there have been good responses. So for example, I think early in response to the protests that have happened, there were bills that were put forward in Congress. So for example, Senator Tim Scott put a Criminal Justice Reform Act forward in the Senate, and I thought it was a great system of reform addressing some of the key issues that came up out of the George Floyd killing. And so again, it's an example kind of similar to what we just touched on with the pandemic. The criminal justice reform that Congress was working on got held up and tanked by partisanship and political games. So we were working as a country towards passing reform that everyone supported, and because there was liberal wish lists that the House was trying to jam through, any hope of reform was taken off the table, and we didn't get any reform through legislation because of the partisanship, not just of Nancy Pelosi, but of my opponent, Cheri Bustos, as well. She was right there working hand in hand with Nancy Pelosi to prevent any reform from happening. So I think it's another example where I want to work across party lines in a bipartisan way to make sure that we're creating solutions to address the outcry that is happening in our country. The second issue, Erlene, is making sure that we support and continue to have safe communities by supporting our law enforcement. That's another issue that comes up in these conversations. And I believe the pathway to reform, Erlene, comes by supporting our law enforcement, not by trying to undercut them or take away the support that they have or the funding that they have.
Okay. And that kind of bleeds into another, one of our follow-up questions was, how do you personally feel about police reform? Is it necessary? If so, what would that entail? But you're speaking of police just need more support, not necessarily reform.
Well, yes, reform, and let's make sure they have further methodologies of training. And like when you sit down with officers, for example, many police departments really support the use of body cameras, for example, but they need funding to make sure they can buy the equipment and maintain the data programs and the staff that they need to implement those reforms. So I think that and for example, like another issue that comes up on a regular basis is how to handle police calls that involve mental health, and how do we get support in there. And I believe that having partnership with police departments with mental health care professionals is another excellent step that we can take. There's so many things that we can do to improve the system. I just don't believe that it comes through the headline that we hear talked about so much, defunding the police. That is not the pathway to reform. I believe the pathway to reform is supporting our law enforcement, because law enforcement is a foundational element to a safe and thriving community.
So, Esther, would helping the police include banning assault weapons and having tighter gun control, or what's your stance on that?
There's a lot of misunderstanding around that issue, Erlene, and assault weapons are already not allowed. Automatic weapons are already not allowed. So I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I don't believe there is a honest conversation happening around Second Amendment issues. So for example, I just recently sat down with a group of mothers who are strong Second Amendment supporters, who had story after story to tell. For example, one mother told a story about she, as a single mother, had an intruder in her home, and she was able to protect her family, keep her family safe, because she owned a weapon. So I believe safe, responsible gun ownership is a methodology for safety.
Erlene, I think you have another question.
Yeah, let's switch gears here a little bit. What you know, your district is strangely shaped, right? You've looked at it. You go all the way over to Rockford, and then you're back over to Galena and down to Savannah and Rock Island. So what is your plan to not only create new jobs for your district, but also to retain the ones that are currently there, with Iowa being so close across the river?
Right, right. Erlene, it takes teamwork to not just bring jobs here, but also, like you mentioned, to retain the companies that are here. So it's, first of all, I think there's a huge opportunity right now, particularly following the pandemic. There's a lot of companies who see the value of locating in the United States, particularly after we had the supply chain complications with China. We weren't able to get the protective equipment that we needed, and there was a lot of complications that were highlighted because of the pandemic. And where United States companies, particularly manufacturing companies, are looking to come back to the United States because of the complicated relationship that we have with the country of China. So what a huge opportunity for me as a representative to advocate with those companies about the value of locating right here in Western Illinois. We have incredible workforce, the people, the location is so central for manufacturers to distribute their products. There's so many competitive advantages that we have right here in Western Illinois. I believe I can play a critical role in bringing jobs here to this part of our state. And on top of that, it is partnering with state level officials and making sure that we promote a business friendly environment, because we are struggling as a state. The complication, the burden that our state government puts on businesses it's tough. It's tough to keep companies here because the state government is heavily taxing businesses. There's worker compensation reform needed. There's so many elements that make us less competitive than the states around us, like Iowa or Wisconsin, which are the two states that border us right here in this congressional district. But I believe with the energy and excitement that Illinoisans are feeling right now, we are hopeful. We are full of energy and motivation to make our communities better. And so I believe that will translate into companies choosing to double down and invest in our communities here because they see the value of the people that we have right here in Illinois. What can be done to fix the system? So Tammy, first of all, I do support a new system. I don't support the Affordable Health Care Act staying in place. However, there are elements of it that we do need to preserve. So the analogy that I was reflecting on in a recent interview, someone was asking me about all the different pieces of the Affordable Health Care Act. And it's like you have a birthday cake that was well put together and you accidentally dropped it on the floor. And yes, you could take bites of that cake and they would still taste delicious. But we are at a point where it is to a better end to bake a new cake than it is to try and clean up the pieces of the Affordable Health Care Act and preserve those pieces. So we need to preserve elements of the Affordable Health Care Act, like coverage for pre-existing conditions, like allowing children up to the age of 26 to stay on their parents' coverage. There are elements that are excellent and did good things for health coverage for Americans that we can preserve. But ultimately, the Affordable Health Care Act has created a spike in cost for most families here in the Illinois 17th Congressional District. The amount of increase has been exponential. For example, I told a story of the family that they pay $27,000 a year for their health insurance. I just spoke to a business owner, and his healthcare costs for his employees, the plan that he has to pay for all of his employees, he's had a 38% increase year over year just to continue to pay for the healthcare for his company staff. He's like, Esther, we can't afford this. We can't continue to operate this business with such a heavy load for healthcare because we won't be able to stay in business. And so it's important that we create a system that lowers the cost of healthcare insurance. I believe the pathway to doing that is competitive markets. So a system that has been under discussion that I think could have a lot of viability is allowing states to create their own marketplaces. So an example of this, the state of Maryland has an exemption to the Affordable Health Care Act. So they were able to create a marketplace within their own state for the residents of Maryland. And they've created different pools and different risk profiles for residents to be able to partner together to create a marketplace to serve the residents' needs in the state of Maryland. And they have lowered the costs by over 27% for people of Maryland. And so I think a great system to look at for policy change going forward and to lower the cost of health insurance for families is to allow states to create marketplaces, and then each person would be able to buy insurance across state lines. So we wouldn't be beholden just to Illinois and only buying insurance here in Illinois, but we would be able to go to any state marketplace and buy insurance. And the state that is doing a good job at lowering costs and providing value for people's health needs would be able to help lower costs for each family that like here in the Illinois 17th, we have so many families that are buying their own health insurance because they're self-employed. Like farmers, for example, are often paying for insurance for their own families. So families would be able to lower their costs, as well as workplaces would be able to have a marketplace to lower health insurance costs for their workers.
Thanks.
You mentioned farmers. We just recently had the derecho come through and do a lot of damage in that area right along east of the Mississippi. With the wildfires in the West, the hurricanes, do you think there should be more government action on climate change? And if so, what would you do?
Erlene, I do believe that climate change is something that we as people can have an effect on. I actually believe farmers are some of the most responsible environmentalists that are, if you think about it, their existence on a day-to-day basis is connected to the land, to the environment. I don't believe, for example, in its effect on farming, I don't believe the government in Washington, D.C. is going to do a better job at environmental concerns for the Illinois 17th than we are. Then farmers should be able to make their own environmental decisions on how to operate their businesses and their farms on the ground on the day-to-day basis. I think there is absolutely space for responsible environmentalism from the federal level, promoting clean energy without requiring artificial I do think subsidies in some energy fields are great because it allows us to create innovation and to further innovate and invent technologies that will allow us to have cleaner energy down the road. But making sure that the government is not artificially choosing winners and losers on environmental concerns, I think is an important aspect of it as well.
Esther, you would agree that farmers and agriculture in general are very dependent on climate and its wide swings. So I guess that was the point of my question. With all these events happening across the U.S. and the fact that in your local district, it was a derecho that, basically laid down fields after field of corn. That was my connection there. So how do you as a legislator try to alleviate some of those swings with the climate if possible? What would you do directly to help the farmer?
Right. Well, for example, in response to the derecho, I think having support on the back end from the federal government would be appropriate. So subsidies or support if necessary, which usually comes through crop insurance programs and that kind of thing. So making sure we're protecting and supporting the risk profile of farmers to make sure that they are able to sustain their operations year over year.
Okay, thank you.
It, another federal stimulus package has stalled. We talked a little bit about that. What do you believe needs to be in the next stimulus package?
Tammy, I support extending the Paycheck Protection Program. I think that's critical. Looking at how we need to support schools to continue to operate safely so that kids are getting great education even during this time of pandemic. I highly support in-person schooling, so making sure that the schools have the correct protective equipment to operate, making sure there's liability protection as part of allowing businesses and public organizations to get back up and running. Those are some key things that should be talked about and discussed in the coming stimulus package. But what really needs to happen is targeted solutions, not just overbroad government action.
Esther, do you see this election as a referendum on Donald Trump and his presidency? And do you think that'll have an impact in your district?
I don't, Erlene. I think that this election right here locally is a referendum on Sherry Bustos and the partisanship that she is bringing to this district. That's not something that we support. That's not something that we believe in. We want to see functional government. We're Midwestern, hardworking, whether farmers or manufacturers. We believe in just getting things done. And so people are paying attention and people know that Sherry Bustos is not working for us. So this election between Esther Joy King, and Sherry Bustos is all about having better representation for the Illinois 17th Congressional District.
Okay. And we're at the half-hour mark, so we want to give you an opportunity. If you've talked about some of the key differences between you and your opponent, but here's your chance to tell people why they should vote for you.
Yeah. Well, there's so much happening in our country right now at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. And I am honored to be part of bringing better representation to this district for each and every one of you. I commit to work hard, to listening, to being part of the community, to being part of representing you better. I cannot wait, and I'm thankful that you would put your trust and belief in me, and I'm just honored to be the future representative for this Illinois 17th Congressional District, because I'm in it with you, and we're going to bring better government to the Illinois 17th Congressional District.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Esther, for taking time to talk with us today. And is there anything else you wanted to add?
I would add from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to you, Tammy, Erlene. It's lovely to get to spend time with you both. And thank you to everyone who is supporting me. It is an honor to be in this with you.
Thank you.